So a great dessert followed by that awesome glazed ham dinner. So now we're ready for the main event. Although some people may think that meal was the main event, it was so good. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our main presenter from the BDO company, is Trevin Stratton. He's been our contact on the file, and we talked with him when we were working on doing due diligence on the Cannabis investment file. And he and his colleagues from BDO undertook the work to conduct a valuation. So it's not an evaluation, it's a valuation, which is more of a business term to determine what the financial worth of a company is. So because Cannabis is a privately traded company as opposed to a publicly traded company, information may be more difficult to obtain. So you have to work closely with the company for them to provide all the financial information and whatever other financial instruments that are required in order to do a full valuation. So Cannabis was very forthcoming in doing that, or Cannabis and their parent company, and Trevin will explain that more to you. So I want you to welcome Trevin to Listuguj and his colleague, Brandon Biganall. To Brandon. So each one of them will come up and introduce themselves and what they do and what their past experiences have been, and then they'll go right into their findings on the valuation. So Trevin?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? It's good? Great. No? First of all, I just want to thank you for inviting us here, inviting us onto your land, inviting us to your community. This is actually my second time in Listuguj. I was here last year for the 25th anniversary powwow, and I was just in awe of the beauty here, the sense of community. It's amazing, and it's great to be back, and thanks for sharing this meal with us too. It was delicious. So Brandon and I work at BDO Canada. As Delphine mentioned, we were kind of engaged to look into the Cannabis file and to provide advice on whether or not this is a good investment. So just to take you a bit through what we're going to talk about today, first of all, I'll just tell you a bit about our firm, who Brandon and I are, what our expertise are in, and why our experience is important for this type of project. Secondly, I'll talk about trends in the cannabis market, the cannabis economy. What does it mean that Canada is legalizing cannabis? What are the economic opportunities or economic development opportunities that are available once that happens? Yeah, no worries. Secondly, I'll talk about the share prices or the value of different cannabis companies. What's been taking place in financial markets over the past few years since this announcement was made. And more specifically, because you're not just thinking about investing in the market itself, but you're thinking about investing in a particular company, I'll take you through what our valuation of that company is, how much money we think that company is worth, and what your investment means if you were to invest in the company. And finally, I'll talk about implications for Listuguj, implications in terms of investing, also other potential opportunities for economic development by being involved with Cannabis. And finally, we'll go to questions and answers, and we'll also have another one of my colleagues from Toronto will be on the phone or over Skype, who did the valuation too, in case you have any questions about that. So first of all, just to let you know a little about ourselves. So BDO, we're a private company. We're the 5th largest professional services firm in the world. We have offices in over 150 countries. Here in Canada, we have over 100 offices, many of which are in smaller or rural communities, so we have a lot of local presence and knowledge in different areas of the country. I think kind of two main points that I really want to stress is number one, we are not a government entity. A lot of people confuse us with BDC, Business Development Canada, mainly because our logo is the same colors and it's just one letter off. We're a private company. Secondly, I also want to mention that we are not a representative of Cannabis. We are an independent third party. We have absolutely no skin in the game. We have nothing to gain by you investing in Zenabis or not. Basically, what we were contracted to help the people of Listuguj in their interactions with Zenabis. We are providing objective advice on the soundness of this investment, whether or not this is a good idea to invest in this company. We're providing analysis on the valuation of the company if you do decide to invest with them, how much ownership should you have for your investment. And we're also able to assist with potential negotiations with Zenabis if you decide to invest with them for a shareholder agreement, and also just provide strategic business advice on different business opportunities that are coming up. So whether or not you decide to invest in Zenabis, it doesn't benefit us at all. So myself, I'm our national lead for economic development for BDO Canada. I love my job. I basically travel all over the country helping different communities, First Nations and municipalities help develop their economies. So I used to be an academic. I'm an economist by trade. So I used to be a university professor. I have a PhD in economics. And so when we're looking at kind of economic trends in the cannabis industry, that was a lot of the work that I did. I was also the keynote speaker at the JEDI plenary session last year, if you know, the Joint Economic Development Initiative in New Brunswick for First Nations communities on opportunities in the cannabis and hemp industry. And I also have a number of engagements. I'm based out of our Ottawa office, as is my colleague Brandon. So we have a number of engagements with the AFN, with Assembly of First Nations. We help them put together their labor market strategy, their economic development strategy, the AFN Health Accord, a lot of that new money that was in the federal budget for health. We helped AFN work on that. And I'll also let my colleague Brandon, do you want to introduce yourself? Yep. So Brandon is a senior manager in our risk advisory practice at BDO Canada. So he has led all those engagements with the AFN for economic development, for labor, for health. He was also on the appointed a member of the Crown First Nations National Joint Task Force on Economic Development. So he's been working in the field of Indigenous economic development for a long time. He also used to work at INAC, but please don't hold that against him. So he was kind of involved in the strategic planning and implementation in a range of different economic development programs across the country as well. So first of all, as I mentioned, I'm an economist, so I apologize for the graphs that are coming up in case you might find them boring. But just to kind of give you an assessment of the actual size of the market and actually what's happening in the cannabis economy in Canada in particular, I'll just go through it. So first of all, a really important point is that the majority of Canadians either support the legalization of cannabis or they're indifferent to it. It doesn't matter to them. So if you look at this, a full 21% strongly support the legalization of cannabis, another 19% somewhat support it, and another 24% of Canadians they don't care either way. So when we're thinking about the potential market once this is legalized, there are going to be a number of people that are going to be open to being potential consumers of cannabis. Secondly, if we break that down by region, you'll notice that the Atlantic region in Atlantic Canada has some of the strongest support for it. The lowest support is in Alberta. But that also means that not only across Canada are people in general in supportive of it, but in the region as well, there is strong support for it. If we're talking about people, the market for people that will be potential consumers in this industry, and basically what I'm trying to show you with all these graphs is just how big the industry is actually going to be, or even currently is, and why there's a huge economic development opportunity in it. So first of all, if we look at current consumers of cannabis, about 7% of Canadians use cannabis every day. Another 4% use it every week. On top of that, another 3% use it every month. And on top of that, another 8% use it what's called occasionally. Basically, we can think about that being once or twice a year. And so that's, a full 22% of Canadians are using cannabis every year. On top of that, that's just currently what's happening while it's still illegal. On top of that, there's another 17% of Canadians that have said, Once it becomes legal, they would be open to consuming cannabis. They don't currently because it's illegal, but once it's legalized, that also increases the market to a full 39% of Canadians will probably be buying it at least once a year. If we look at internationally, where does Canada lie when it comes to this? Canada is number 5 in the world in terms of cannabis consumption. If you look at the countries that are ahead of it, Papua New Guinea, Palau, Northern Mariana Islands, these are tiny countries a lot of the time with very small populations. Obviously, Israel is a pretty big country. So Canada is kind of near the top when it comes to the potential market for cannabis consumers. Also, and I think this is very important for potential economic development and business opportunities for Listuguj. If we look at how people prefer to buy their cannabis, or they've been asked in a survey how they would prefer to buy it once legalization happens, people that are consumers of cannabis or potential consumers of cannabis strongly prefer privately owned cannabis retailers. And so that means even though governments, New Brunswick and Quebec, have announced that they're going to be distributing cannabis through their own network of alcohol distribution, there is a huge amount of people in the market or consumers that are interested in an alternative way to be able to purchase it. And so that offers opportunities for different First Nations communities if they're able to provide an alternative to those government distribution models. If we're talking about the size of the market, it's actually staggering how big it is. So if we're just looking at the base market of people that consume cannabis, how often they consume it times the price of it, the market's around $5 to $9 billion, and that's every year. So about $5 to $9 billion in economic activity takes place just by people consuming cannabis. But it's important to remember that on top of that, there are a number of other spin-off industries. So apart from growers, there are what's called infused product makers. So obviously there's cannabis flower. There are waxes that can also be created, concentrates. There are what are called edibles that can also be created with THC. So anything like that is another spin-off industry if that exists. Testing labs are also going to be other types of businesses that are going to be built around the new legalization of cannabis. And one of the biggest ones that people are talking about is security as well. There are going to have to be, a lot of new security businesses created for the protection of these facilities, and that increases economic activity too. And so when we think about the potential upside, there's also tourism revenue, potential business taxes, licensing fees, and also paraphernalia for use. And so the projections are, the upside of the size of the market is over $22 billion per year for this market. So just to give you kind of a brief summary, the majority of Canadians support cannabis legalization or they're indifferent. Atlantic Canada has some of the highest support for cannabis legalization in the country. The percentage of Canadians that currently consume cannabis and the potential market represents one of the highest consumption rates in the world. Consumers prefer privately owned cannabis retailers to government distribution models, and the potential upside of the market is greater than $22 billion. So obviously that means that there are a lot of opportunities for economic development, for business development in the industry. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that an investment is wise or necessarily that an investment in an individual company is wise. And so that's what I want to get into the next section, is talking about actual investments in the industry and investments in Zenabis specifically. So this is, apart from the economy, if we're looking at the prices of cannabis shares on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So this is an index of the 24 largest cannabis companies that are publicly traded on the stock market. If you look at the general trend, it has spiked way up over the past few years since the announcement of legalization happening. Some of you might know people that work in the financial industry. Cannabis stocks are some of the hottest stocks in Toronto right now, in addition to Bitcoin. They've seen some of the largest gains over the past few years of any stocks in any industry. And so a lot of people that got in early have made a lot of money off of these companies and off of these investments. If we're talking about Zenabis in particular, I'll kind of take you through a bit of their business model. So Zenabis is a brand of IHMML, that's International Herbs Medicinal Marijuana Limited. It's privately owned, it's not publicly traded, so not anyone can invest in this company. If it was publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, then just anyone could buy into it. So this company actually controls who is an owner. It has 3 facilities in Canada. The first one, the company is based out of Delta, BC. So the first one is out there. It's a 25,000 square foot facility for both the cultivation and the distribution of medical marijuana. The second one is obviously in the region right here, and that's a 393,000 square foot facility. So that hasn't been built out yet. What's currently operational is 63,000 square feet are currently being used. Brandon and I actually went to visit the facility this morning, and it's an impressive facility just to see the scale of what's being built there. It is massive. It's going to be one of the largest facilities in Canada, and it is Zenabis' largest facility in the country too. And then thirdly, there's Stellarton, Nova Scotia, where a 275,000 square foot facility is under development. That hasn't been built yet, but it will come online at some point soon. If we're talking about the licensing for it, both the BC and New Brunswick facilities have already been licensed last summer. And the Stellarton, Nova Scotia facility is still awaiting their license. In terms of kind of the future expectations in the cannabis industry, cannabis share prices have fluctuated, as you saw in kind of the first graph for this section, significantly, but the overall trend is very high growth that's taking place. That can increase or decrease quite quickly because the market is fluctuating so much. So for instance, we did that valuation near the end of December. Right in the last few days of December, there was a huge spike in share prices. And so one of the takeaways from that is that if you are going to decide to invest in Zenabis, if you believe that those share prices are going to keep going up, then it makes sense to invest as soon as possible, because then your share ownership is going to be greater while their share price is lower. Revenues are projected to grow exponentially, as I mentioned. And based on Zenabis' current valuation, so Listuguj has lent Zenabis $3 million plus interest, which I'll get to in a bit. So based on our current valuation, around $300 million, well, a bit over $300 million, but you get a discount if you convert to ownership. You'll get about a 1% ownership of Zenabis. So the Listuguj would own 1% of the company. So if we talk about the implications for Listuguj. So this is just kind of taking you through what happened and what are your options going forward. So Listuguj lent Zenabis $3 million in August 2016, and this loan bears an interest of 5% per year. So Zenabis has to pay Listuguj back $3 million plus 5% interest over the 2 years that have almost taken place since that agreement took place. And they have to do that no matter what. But this loan is what's called a convertible debenture. And so the money owed to Listuguj can be converted to ownership in the company. So you could decide, instead of getting Zenabis to pay your money back plus interest, you can use that amount and convert it into ownership in the company. And what you get for the terms of the original agreement would be Class A common shares. And so the idea is that if the loan is repaid, then Listuguj can use this money, this $3 million plus interest, immediately in the community. While if the loan is converted and invested in Zenabis, then the $3 million can increase significantly in value over time. So a larger amount of money can be used in the community in the future. So that's kind of the decision that you have right now, is you can have $3 million plus interest, so about $3.3 million that they would have to pay you right now, or you could potentially have $10 million or $12 million in 5 or 10 years. And so the basic idea is that there's a trade-off between short-term and long-term gains, whether you want them to pay back the loan or whether you want to invest and get a lot more money over the long term. So here's just the options described. So option 1 would be Listuguj asks Zenabis to repay the $3 million loan. And because you get 5% interest per year, you would get $3.3 million back. Or Listuguj converts the $3 million loan to share ownership in Zenabis. And so then Listuguj would receive about 1% ownership of the company. And this investment would increase or decrease over time depending on how long you want to hold your ownership of the company. And so if this option is chosen, as I mentioned, then that means that you believe in the future of Zenabis or that your investment will increase, which means that it's probably best to invest as soon as possible or decide to do so as soon as possible. When we're talking about the different opportunities that are available on top of investment, there are also other economic development opportunities available to the community. So both New Brunswick and Quebec have announced that cannabis will be distributed and sold by the provincial governments, but it's unclear how this decision will impact First Nations. First of all, it's unclear how it will impact the ability to have distribution points on reserve. Listuguj or LMG's preference is to manage sales in the community by putting a bylaw in place. Secondly, it's unclear how sales to individuals from outside the community would work. Even if there's, if Listuguj does decide to have distribution within the community with that bylaw, it still hasn't been announced, what sales would be like to individuals from outside the community. And third, the transportation and distribution of cannabis over provincial borders is also unclear. Obviously, Listuguj being in a location that is right on a provincial border, that has implications for the community. And so that hasn't been announced yet, and I know that there has been kind of alcohol aspects that have taken place here recently too. So to kind of find out what's happening there are opportunities, but also potential risks. But of course, when it comes to economic development opportunities, one of the big ones is employment for the community. There are already a number of people that were hired by Zenabis that are currently working there from the community. As I mentioned, they are harvesting in about 2 months, and they're going to need to really ramp up the amount of staff that they have in that period. And so obviously, just the way that business works, if you have an investment in them, obviously they're probably going to look favorably on people from your community for economic development and employment opportunities. There's also entrepreneurial opportunities for members of Listuguj, people that want to create their own companies in this industry. So I mentioned a lot of these spin-off industries that are taking place, whether they be security companies, testing labs, paraphernalia, edibles, topicals, concentrates. These are all also potential entrepreneurial opportunities or opportunities from members of the community to create their own businesses around the hub of Zenabis in this industry. And finally, there's another opportunity for a potential distribution network with other Mi'kmaq communities or other First Nation communities. There are a few other communities in the region that are thinking about investments in Zenabis as well. So being able to pool your power and your ownership is also a potential opportunity too. So I will leave it at that in terms of the presentation. I hope it wasn't too painful. And I believe that we're taking a break before we go to questions and answers. Is that right? Yes.
Thank you, Trevin. We're going to take a 10-minute break so you can get up and stretch your legs, use the bathroom, get more water, coffee. And the purpose is for Wei to connect with Trevin's colleague, who's the
He's the valuation. He's got the evaluation.
he's the evaluation expert in case there's a really deep technical question that these guys can't answer. We'll make sure that we have somebody available that can answer that. He's also with BDO. It's the whole company that did. 10-minute break.
aspects of the industry, just how distribution is going to happen through the government. But as we've talked to a lot of communities across the country as well, a lot of communities are going forward with their plan for this anyway, and they're willing to go to court if it takes.
Okay, well, I guess it's a question that we would have to ask of our chief and counsel, and I don't think we're going to have that I don't think we're able to ask the chief and counsel questions tonight according to this from what I see. Notwithstanding that, just from a professional point of view for your company, I don't know who you guys are, I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were before I came here. Do you feel that your evaluation was done at a critical point for Listuguj, or do you feel that from a professional point of view, nobody's going to be insulted here, because in my experience, this valuation probably should have been done before Listuguj decided to invest $3 million into Zenabis. Can you answer that for me, please?
If Listuguj had converted their investment earlier, earlier, as soon as possible as they were able to, the percentage of ownership would be larger than it is now. So, if you had converted earlier, you would have already made money.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. Going back to the history that you stated here with Listuguj getting involved in this project, I know you wrote it down here somewhere. The chronology?
Near the end.
Anyway, in the chronology of this whole process, do you feel that Listuguj should have engaged a professional firm to do evaluation prior to their saying to Zenabis, we will lend you $3 million? That's my question.
Well, it depends if you decide to invest or not, because it was a loan. It wasn't an investment at the beginning. And so, notwithstanding whatever the value of the company is, you would still be getting that $3 million back plus 5% per annum. So you'd still be making, $300,000 at the end of the 2 years, whether the company was valued or not at the beginning.
Okay, just a comment that you don't have to answer this. In my opinion, if somebody asked me, Tim, you have money, you got $3 million bucks, do you want to invest in this company? And I said, geez, I don't have a clue. I think I would have hired a company like BDO to give me the proper advice to say, yes, this is a possible good investment, or something that, you know what I mean? If you want to lend them money, then it's a good move. I don't understand that we're at this point where we've already invested $3 million into a company. Our back is kind of up, I wouldn't say against the wall, but we've got an evaluation that's been given to us, says we'll achieve 1% status within this company, which I think is fair for the valuation that you've made. We didn't know that 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We didn't know the trends in the marijuana industry. We didn't know that it was going to be legalized or that it was going to be rejected by Parliament. I'm just wondering if the valuation of this company should have come prior to the LMG saying, Zenabis, we're going to lend you $3 million. That's it. You don't have to answer it.
I just want to clarify that the investment hasn't been made yet. It's currently a loan to Zenabis. You now have the decision whether or not to turn that into ownership.
And in terms of timing, I'll speak to that just a bit. 2 years ago, 2 years ago, it was a very different landscape, a very different environment in terms of the government. In those 2 years, everything has changed, so you would still be doing a second valuation anyways. Doing that first investment gave you the opportunity to get an understanding of the industry, get a feeling for the organization, and it kind of built that repertoire. So I do think you guys are in a good position now, and it is a good time to kind of start looking into the evaluation.
Oh, okay. I just had one question. What are the requirements that you need to work there? Because I heard that we only have 4 people in the reserve working there out of 40, which is pretty low. So I was just wondering what you would need to work there for like any job, or like if you even need anything.
Yeah, unfortunately, since we're not from Zenabis, I mean the information I have on that is probably similar to the information that you're privy to. But I do know from just speaking with them today that 10 members of the community have worked there since they set up before, are currently there. And I would imagine that it would have different aspects for different job positions as well.
So I can help to answer some of that question. There are a few people that worked there since last summer, and they have like come and gone. But initially what Listuguj did was they, along with LMDC, organized a cohort of people to follow a program which was called Plant Production and Facility Management. So it just gave people an overview of what the industry, the cannabis industry is, and what it means to legalize, and what kind of regulations were going to be put into place, and how these companies were going to be held to that to the standards. And so that should give people an edge to get a job in there. But the company also has its own standards of employment, and so we can ask to put some jobs aside and encourage them to hire people that took the course, and the people go and they do what they have to do. There are others, like one young fellow that's working there now holds a degree in chemistry. So that was very attractive to the company, and probably helped because he was from Listuguj, and because of his excellent academic background, that helped him to get that job there. So anybody that has a background that they're looking for to work in there, biology, chemistry, maybe in plant production or facility management, security, whatever the jobs are, they'll have to compete like anybody else, but we certainly try to nudge the company to give a preference and, to our people. I don't know if that helps with the explanation. Okay.
Being that this is a new industry, and with the loan, you're guaranteed that 5% return. So that's a sure bet. This is 1%, which gains are higher, but your risk factor is also much higher. So is there anything, I know sometimes you can have a ceiling or caps. Is there anything offered in those areas with this share?
Yeah, so from the projections that we did, and I didn't want to bombard you with a bunch of tables and graphs on our financial methodology, but we did look at growth trends in the industry and in the market, and so that's the reason. We see that high growth taking place within kind of the first half of the next 10 years, within the first 5 years, and then it tapers off. And so the expectation is that the increase in the value of your share, if you do decide to invest, would increase quite a bit over those first 5 years. Then after that, the market's going to become more saturated. As you said, it's a new industry. But I think that's a very good point. It is, I talked about the trade-off between short-term, getting your money back now plus some interest, versus long-term, potentially having huge gains. And the difference between those two things is your appetite for risk. Do you want to potentially make this investment and have, potentially a huge windfall for your community? With a higher degree of risk, though not, it's, when we look at these companies, most of them are definitely going to be increasing in value over the short term.
Okay, one other question. Is this, with the 5% that's an annual, when you come to shares, you're getting values annually, but what percentages are you getting as a payout? Or do they just roll over into buying more shares?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So you're talking about dividends, basically. I mean, what dividends will the company be giving out each year? Unfortunately, we can't project that in advance. We don't know. Usually, newer companies, particularly ones that are in high growth, are going to be reinvesting their profits in the company instead of giving out a dividend to grow as fast as possible. That also means that by reinvesting the money in the company, the value of your ownership might also increase faster. But in terms of a dividend, that will depend on the company's decision at the end of each year, and what position they're in and what their strategy or plan is for the future.
And how many shareholders will the company have that will make that decision?
It's a privately owned company, so it's not publicly traded. The majority, basically, the people that are owners, if a vote adds up to 50% plus one of the ownership of the company, of the value of the company, not the individuals, then that decision can be made.
Good evening. First, I want to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on unceded Mi'kmaq territory. I have a couple of statements that are not necessarily questions. With regards to offspring businesses, as you mentioned, there will be a case coming forward fairly soon. I believe there's a First Nation in the West that is preparing to challenge provincial and federal interference in the rights of First Nations people to open businesses on reserve. If the community is being asked to invest a substantial sum of their money in a business, I think it would be appropriate if the community and the members of that community had the option to view and look at a business plan from Zenabis so that we can get some sense of what their plans are. And thirdly, and perhaps this is a question, if sometime down the road the community members feel it's in their best interest to sell their shares, what options and opportunities are available for them to do so?
Absolutely, those are good comments and questions. I'll answer your second one first, which was a very good question too. I mean, so opportunities for sales, you could potentially sell those shares back to the company at the rate at which the valuation might be in the future after you invest, and potentially make a profit off of that. You could potentially sell to another shareholder as well. We also don't know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, they have no indications that they will go public, but they might also be acquired by a larger firm, at which point you will have options on what you would want to do with your ownership as well. And so there are a few different aspects to that. Yeah. So, sorry, can you remind me of your first comment again? Okay.
Hi, my name is Blanche Martin, and I'm a community member here. And on this paper that you made presentations tonight, there's nothing mentioned about taxable, because I know if you have investment outside of the communities, they are taxable. So what happens if they invest, or are we going to be deducted and asked to pay for the taxes?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not sure about that one. We could ask our lawyers and get back to you.
Yeah, because it's not very clear to us on that part.
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Brenda Gideon. That's an interesting point that Blanche just made, because it's a very good segue to a comment I want to make. And that is that, if I recall correctly, historically, the plant itself where it is now located is traditional Mi'kmaq territory. It's sitting on Mi'kmaq land, which is a very interesting point that she just raised. I went, that's absolutely bang on, because the way in which the original, I would imagine the terms of the agreement, the loan agreement, should have very effectively and factually upfront put out those historical facts. And that would have been a leverage for the chief and council then to further the impact, the positive impact, 6 months, following the terms of the agreement. So if that wasn't done, then we've done ourselves a disservice in not bringing those those historical facts right at the table. Whether it's a corporate, whether it's a a political or government body, it does not matter. I think our position has always been very clear, and it should have been front and center. Because as a result of that, we now say, well, there might be one person working there, there might be 4, there might be 10. Nobody really knows the number. Maybe someone here does. But if we had negotiated the terms of the loan agreement right from the outset with some very strong positions, then I think we'd be in a better position now to to give our community facts and figures about where we are in terms of our progress, in terms of the development of the agreement. The agreement is being discussed and developed perhaps with the chief and council. I'm not sure to the extent of their involvement in this, but after 2 years, it's my humble opinion that we should know much more about the content of the terms of the agreement originally. We should all be clear about what our political position is, which hasn't changed over the last 25 years, I would say. So that $3 million investment, the terms of the loan, and the employment opportunity, which is a dire need in this community, and the employment and the opportunities, all of the, the value-added opportunities, should be on the table now, I would think. And instead of the community saying, well, what's going on with this? Why aren't we working there? And so on and so forth. There's a lot of questions that are, that are out there, for the community, and they're still not being answered. So that's just something that I think is very critical and important that we don't forget about, that we always remember in the forefront of our mind where this plant is situated, and that we have a position and leverage that is very unique to the other 2 plants that you're referring to. And so the compensation hasn't even been dealt with, on Jugu. And I think it's time. I think, we're in a very good position now to go back and say, we don't, I mean, for all due respect, we don't need an investment company to say, this is what our position is, this is what we want, and these are our terms of the agreement, and in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, this is how, we see our future in this industry. And I think that we ought to be a little bit more assertive, more aggressive, and much more forthcoming in terms of our position in this whole process. That is my feeling on this right now. And so rather than, because I heard somebody say, well, we can ask for jobs. Well, God damn it, I think past the time for asking for jobs. I think it's a very good position that we're in, because the number of jobs, as I understand it, over the last year and a half since they've started hiring, I'm not sure. I haven't seen a lot of information about the type of jobs and the affirmative action plan that the chief and council would have had to or should have negotiated in order for the community to be involved. $3 million is not chump change. It's a lot of money. And it was at a time when they really needed that investment. So they needed us, they needed our community, they needed our money. And so now, payback, where is it? Is my ultimate question. So your presentation is very good, but I think we could go a lot deeper, and I think the picture is a lot bigger.
Absolutely. Those are great points. So if you do decide to invest instead of getting the loan back, there will be an opportunity to bring up all of those points in the shareholder agreement to add whatever you want in terms of the negotiations that would take place with the company if you decide to invest. Then those can be put in there, and those are definitely great points to bring up when that happens. Absolutely, if that happens.
You said that it's going to be a private investment company?
Yes.
What are the dangers of being bought out by other companies once you start investing your money?
Well, the dangers are if you want to kind of go forward with Zenabis in perpetuity, right? I mean, let's say they sell to a larger company, the Canopy Growth I mentioned, right? The biggest one, which is based out of Ontario. The risk wouldn't be losing your investment. I mean, you would likely make a lot of money off your investment if they sell to a bigger company. The risk might be potentially the facility not being used because it's more efficient for a company in Ontario or BC to use another facility that they already have or something closer to their supply chain, something like that. But in terms of the value of the investment, if they were to sell, obviously the company wouldn't decide to sell if the owners themselves weren't making money off of it, and you yourself would also be an owner, so you would also be making money off of that.
What if there is a hostile takeover or something like that? That's been happening in the market, so.
It's possible there could be a hostile takeover. You'd still probably make money if there was a hostile takeover. Also keep in mind that this isn't a publicly traded company. So if there were to be some sort of hostile takeover, so not just any investor, I can't invest in Zenabis. Brandon can't invest in Zenabis. It's not possible. It's not traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange unless their ownership invites us to invest. And so for a hostile takeover to happen for a private company, it would be very difficult unless, if there are a number of owners that are, in the majority and they have a disagreement, then maybe there could be one faction that wants to kind of take over the company and they try and do things along those lines. But it would be very unlikely that there would be a type of hostile takeover for a private company in this industry.
So there is a certain amount of risk involved.
Oh, there's definitely an amount of risk involved. It's not high risk, high reward, but it's medium to high risk, high reward. Sorry?
The prices on the stuff you're going to sell.
Oh, of what they're going to sell?
Government, same price as the government, or?
Well, so they will be producing and then selling to the government for the government to distribute. Are you talking about if Listuguj were to distribute as well?
Huh?
Are you talking about if Listuguj were to distribute as well?
Yeah, the prices that you're going to use, the government
price per gram.
prices, or?
So, I mean, that's a really good point, actually. So, whatever the government is going to be selling at, the price per gram is obviously they're going to make a lot of money off of taxing it, right? And then they're going to use that money for healthcare or whatever they decide to use it for. If there are private retailers or First Nations retailers that are going to be operating in the industry, then First Nations have a potential opportunity to undercut what the government is selling at, thereby making people more likely to buy from First Nations communities.
Okay.
So yeah, just a bit of a reminder as well, because we're not actually affiliated with Zenabis, we won't know exactly what their price structure is going to be. So we're just sort of the independent third parties. We don't know all the details of, you know, their forward plans in terms of grams per sale. So some of those things are still kind of outside of our scope.
And also keep in mind, so Zenabis will be selling wholesale. They're not selling per gram to the government. They're going to be selling per kilogram to the government. Then the government itself will be selling per gram to consumers.
Just one final comment, maybe question from myself. There was some suggestion by Sandy, Sandy questioned the use of profits, and there was some question whether they would be paid out as dividends, whether they would go back into the company reinvestment. You made some projections for us as to what a future valuation of would be for Zenabis, and I'm not sure if you guys saw the business plan. I know Alan suggested possibly that it should be privy information to the community, or at least to somebody who can look at it and make a proper recommendation to the community, because there are 3 recommendations, correct? So there's no certainty for the community to say in year 3, if you invest, you're going to get X amount of dividends. In year 5, you're going to get X amount of dividends. You have no way of certainty to say that whatsoever. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I guess that's important for the community members to learn that the potential for actually achieving revenues from that 1% interest in that company is going to depend on the majority shareholders or board of directors who control the shares within Zenabis or whatever corporation we fall under. It's up to them. So if they say, we're going to put all the money back in, we want to achieve greater profits by year 10, that means we're not getting a dividend. Our money is going to remain within the company. Our share will grow within the company, but the dividend may be retained for a long period of time. And we'll never know that, I guess, right? Is that projected in the business plan? Do you know that at all?
So Zenabis was, I mean, they were pretty open with providing us with information. Sometimes companies aren't, particularly because we're another company. So they gave us their new organizational structure. They gave us their financial projections and their financial statements. They did not give us their business plan. We did ask for it.
So I guess ultimately our decision is going to be based on all of the questions and comments that everybody had here are really valuable, and I think the decision is going to be on how important it is for us to have access to that $3 million and any profits or dividends that are going to come from that, and how long it's going to take for us to achieve that. Thank you.
Does the product go to the government, or is there an option for the reserve to purchase the product?
That's an excellent question, and we've been suggesting that if you do decide to go ahead with the investment, that should be part of the negotiations. If Listuguj does want to pursue distribution or creating other types of products like edibles or oils, then to be able to negotiate with Zenabis, having access to that should definitely be part of the negotiations if you want to go ahead with the shareholder agreement.
Is there any laws right now to stop
No one
us
knows.
from purchasing?
No one
from,
knows. And I mean, this isn't even a Quebec or New Brunswick thing. It's all across the country. There are some First Nations that are already operating private dispensaries on their land. Some of them are, not being bothered by RCMP. Some of them are. So it's still up in the air.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, all right.
On page 10, the general, the 3 options, 1, 2, and 3, And I guess it's a process question on my part. How are we going to respond as a community to these three options? Is there going to be a vote, a referendum? What is the process whereby the community can have their input, and so there is a community response to the three options?
I think on that one we'd have to defer to Chief and Council.
Yeah.
And the second part to that question is, what is the timeline? Like, is there a time frame for us to respond, at the end of the...
Yes. There is. So
okay,
the,
can we have that answer then, please?
So the original terms of the agreement were for 2 years, so that was in August 2016. So by August of this year, if you don't decide to convert, then you will get your loan back plus interest.
There's also a risk too of waiting of a change in the, there's also a risk depending on when you decide to go forwards of a change in the valuation. So the valuation's a point in time. If it's August, that valuation can change and the value of the ownership stake could change. It could go up, it could go down. Yeah. It's hard to predict, but the way it's looking is that it would continue to decrease as they continue to expand their capacity.
Right. And also, I mean, assuming that the current timelines for legalization are going to be, that the government will stick to it, then if legalization happens in July, then the potential value of this company could go up, if you decide in late July or August.
Yeah, you're saying here that Listuguj is going to receive 1% ownership. Is that based at $3 million?
Yes.
So what would you base the value of Zenabis at?
So the value of Zenabis we have between $312 and I think $381 million.
Currently?
Yes, currently. Okay. As of December, yes.
Thank you.
Following George's question, that valuation, was that given to you by Zenabis? Is it a...
Nope. That's our own independent valuation that we did.
Which is a summary of all their assets and that sort of thing?
Exactly, yeah. Their funded capacity, all their assets, their debt, all of that, yes.
Does that include the IMH Corporation?
Yes, exactly. I mean, Zenabis is just kind of the brand that they're using. This is IHMML is kind of the umbrella corporation, but yeah, I mean, it is for the entire corporation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, George, Zenabis is not worth that much. Their parent company is. Is that correct?
Yes, well, Zenabis is a brand of the parent company.
I was just wondering how much a share would be compared to other companies around Canada. How much would a share be?
Well, we'd have to see. So Zenabis has recent investors, some of which are First Nations in the region too. So we'd have to see how many shares they've actually split and how much they've actually given out recently. Mm-hmm. The idea is that if you have $3 million, then you get 1% ownership. How many shares and the value of that would have to be determined when you talk to them.
I'm just trying to get an estimate on how much, if someone like me went to buy a share, if they allowed it, how much would a share be?
So a part of the valuation is that we looked at other comparable companies in the market. I had a list of a few of them. Those are publicly traded companies, but I mean, those have a huge range. On average, let's say around $12 per share.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, those are publicly traded as well. Yeah, a very, very high number of shares. Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's, that's the thing. I mean, you can have one share that's worth your $3 million, or you can have 3 million shares that are worth $1 each. As long as it's still 1% ownership, that's kind of the thing that will matter.
Is the option to buy shares available to just to the band office, or is it to the whole reserve?
So the option to buy shares are just by the term agreement that was signed 2 years ago, so that $3 million loan can be converted to ownership. Zenabis has actually stopped taking on new investors. So if you were to be able to get on, you'd be kind of one of the last people that they would let come on.
So at this time, there's no options to buy any shares at all?
Not for individuals, no.
Okay.
Back and forth.
I'm just curious now about the way in which I asked about structure earlier. Now I'm talking about I was talking about process earlier. Now I'm curious about the structure. So you have virtually, how many members do we have in the community, off and on? Say 35, 4,000. So they're all shareholders, for all intents and purposes. Okay, so we're in a kind of a unique and awkward situation here, because we have, let's say just for a conversation, 4,000 shareholders on and off reserve, and so we now need a body to serve as either a corporate body, I would think. So is the community offering that to, or is that legally possible in a corporate structure for a political body like the chief and council to be negotiating a shareholder agreement? Or do we have to now lickety-split create a corporation that will work through this process?
Absolutely. So Millbrook just recently invested in Zenabis, $5 million, and they did it through their Economic Development Corporation. I don't believe that's possible for Listuguj because they're not under the FNLM. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Madeline Germain. I've been listening all evening, questions and things that people want the information. And that's why we're here, to hear all the information that we needed and wanted. My concern is that the questions that are being asked are not being answered. I don't like it when people say, I don't know. When you come to our territory and give us all this so-called information and you can't complete it. You know, like you're in a situation right now that you don't know a lot of things, just like us. The information about cannabis and marijuana and the people that are supposed to be working. We don't have all that information, and we thought we would get some of the answers this evening. But you're not giving it to us. So I would like it maybe to have another meeting or another conference or something to be able to, for you two to come back here and answer our questions, like business plans. We'd like to see a business plan. How did this start from the beginning anyway? Who started it? What brought you here? Who brought all these information here? So I would like to know that, and hopefully maybe the next time, the next meeting we have, it would be very good to have all the answers. And personally, I don't like the idea of having marijuana or cannabis or whatever you want to call it to be on our territory. You know, we have enough problems on the reserves, and especially here. I'm just going to talk about here. You know, our people are dying from alcohol and drugs. And this is another form of a drug. And they say, oh, we're going to take it because it's going to cure or relieve some pain. Well, excuse me, marijuana does not relieve pain. And if it does, it's because it's being mixed with other drugs so that people can use it and say, oh, it's working for me. I don't believe that. I strongly don't believe that. And I think the government, what they're doing is that we're, this is something else altogether. But I don't like what's happening with my people. We're being used all the time. We're being put down. We are being used, and people are not getting the proper information. So I would like that. That's my opinion for this session this evening. And I'm very disappointed that you don't have all the answers. Thank you.
So that's a very good point. And to address the information that we don't have, I just want to stress again that we are not representatives of Zenabis. And so if you want to get kind of those answers that for those questions that we've been unable to answer, then what might be useful would be to be able to ask Zenabis directly some of these questions. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'll try my best to answer some of the questions, Madeline. I want to thank Trevin and Brandon for the information they provided. It's true there were some questions that you guys asked they didn't have answers to, and they were very specific in we were specific in their mandate when they took on the work to do the evaluation of the company, Zenabis, or IHMML, which is International Herbs Medical Marijuana, which is the parent company. This is who Listuguj is invested with, not just Zenabis, but all of them, and they have 3 companies. So we have a potential to benefit off of all the 3 and not just the one that's across the river. For additional information on cannabis is readily available on the internet. You can go on the Canada website to have all kinds of information on the Health Canada, Justice. There's for sure you can't just go look at Zenabis to look for the information because it's just one company of many, maybe like 60 some or 70 licensed producers that have a license with Health Canada to produce it. So just to go back on the history a little bit of why the government of Canada, and I'm not the expert on this is what I just read, right, and what I have read for myself, and that the government of Canada wanted to legalize cannabis because it wanted to take out the black market. So people are growing cannabis or marijuana in their basements. They're growing it in their spare bedrooms, in their gardens outside, up in the woods. It's growing, and it's not just in Listuguj, it's everywhere. People are growing it. People sitting here in this room are probably potentially growing it. So it's there. It's a big black market. It's controlled by, I don't know if it's could be anybody, right? Anybody could be. I could be, I'm not. I'm just saying that anybody can be growing it, selling it, transporting it, whatever. It's illegal. It's a black market, and what the government is trying to do is legalize it. They've legalized the medical marijuana, and now we're heading into the legalization of recreational marijuana. It's highly regulated, and you can check. It's the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulation, ACMPR. ACMPR. If you just Google that, it'll give you all the regulations and how it's controlled. And this is how the Zenabis plant, the Delta plant in BC, and the Sellerton one to come, and all the other ones that were mentioned tonight are all regulated under Health Canada and those rules. And it's anticipated that when it becomes, the recreational becomes legal, and the government steps in and they can tax it, being sold that some of those, the money that's derived from the taxes can be turned back into various health programs, awareness, addiction programs, and whatnot, as is already done in a lot of other situations. That's my very simple overview. But if somebody else has something else to add on that, I don't know if Darcy wants to add to that. He can.
I think we're missing the point. Finding information on cannabis is quite easy. But I think the point was, if the community is being asked to take $3 million and buy shares in a company, the company ought to respect the community enough to be here and be invited here and answer some of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the community can take the information that's given here tonight,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very good information, but it still doesn't talk about Zenabis.
Well,
Who
it's
are
the
they?
Point taken, for sure. We asked that amongst ourselves. We wanted the focus of this session to be about the potential investment, what shareholding means, what it means to Listuguj, and we wanted the meeting to be focused on that. We had other information sessions since the last year or so, where we had individuals from the Zenabis company and the IHMML come and give information. We've had a open house at their plant, so people can go in and see the plant, the facility. So and we can request again if people are interested to do that, and if you want somebody from there to come here to provide more information particular to that, we can do that as well. But just so you know that for tonight, we wanted to keep the meeting focused on the valuation and the financial worth of the company. Mm-hmm. So that was the focus of the meeting, Alan. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think if we're trying to present an objective view of the value of the company, we wanted to bring in objective people who have a very clear methodology in how they approach doing the valuation, and then it's objective, right? We didn't want to go to Zenabis. We could have went to Zenabis and asked them, "What's the value of your company?" What do you think they would have told us? Huh? Exactly. But we want to be sure, and okay, I'm missing it. Maybe.
Yes. Right. Okay. So just to reiterate what he's saying that he feels that a lot of the questions that were asked tonight could have been better answered by the company. And yes, some of those questions that were asked tonight could have been answered better by the company. What Delphine is saying is, that wasn't the point of this meeting, right? Is to have the company here answering your questions. This was us as Listuguj talking about our option of investment without them in the room, right? Us, amongst us, not with Zenabis sitting right there saying, well, are you going to invest or not? Come on, get this over and done with. This is a good deal. Come on, right? We don't need that. We can talk amongst ourselves. So we asked LMG, Economic Development, asked BDO to do a valuation of the potential of the investment. So that's why BDO is here. That's why they've been invited here, because they have no connection. They have no connection to any of it. It's independent. It's unbiased. Whether we invest or not, they still go home and they keep doing their work. If we invest, they still go home and they keep doing their work. It doesn't matter to them. It matters to us. So they're neutral. They're unbiased. That's why they're here. And it's important that we had this discussion. And then the first thing we did earlier is, before the meeting, said let's make sure that we get all of the questions that are asked here. Make sure that we get everything that's asked here so that we can put out those information. What questions are asked? If we don't have the answers, we can find those answers and we can keep having that opportunity to answer those questions. Okay? That's the part. As I said in the beginning, this has been an ongoing discussion. It's not our first meeting, and it probably won't be the last time we talk about this issue. I understand we've probably never done this before in the history of Listuguj, right? We've probably never had an equity stake in any company before. Correct me if I'm wrong. Have we ever done that? Where? When? AVCell? We had an equity stake in AVCell? Okay. And what happened there? Do we still have shares in AVCell?
Yeah, AVCell, and that's the only company. We don't have shares anymore in AVCell, I don't believe.
Okay. All right, so we don't have shares there anymore. Again, but back to my point, this is new, this is different. It's understandable. It's also very different in the fact that we've never had an opportunity, as far as I know, to get into an industry as it's about to start. As it's about to start, when it's first beginning. You know, you look back at Marshall and you look at how much difference that has made for our community over the last 20 years. It's tremendous. We've done so much, but we've had to fight and claw and push and kick and complain our way into everything, right? That was getting into something that was already established. There was already a lot of people that had quotas, they had their licenses, they had everything. And we had to push and try to get some of that for us, right? And because that's our right. In this, it's a little different. It's brand new. It's still getting set up. We have a chance to be there in the beginning if that's what we want to do. From the beginning. We can buy our way in, we can get an equity stake if we want to, if that's what we want to do. Right? And that's why we're having this discussion. It's very, very new. And I can appreciate that. And then the topic on top of that, I mean, I worked with kids for the last 18 years. I know how touchy this is. I do. I really do. Yep. Well, I couldn't start when I was 11, but I started as soon as I could, right? And I can appreciate that. And, you know, I'll just share a little part, right, where the evolution of it. The other day, we were meeting with regards to some things with regards to our family, and the doctor actually made the recommendation, I would rather see you smoke marijuana than drink. And are you kidding? It just shifts that's a medical doctor that's saying that. So it shows that maybe I'm not ready to accept it, but there is a change in the approach that people are being treated for different ailments. There is a reason why there's medical marijuana now. There is a reason why people are being prescribed this as a medicine. There is some medical benefit to it. There is an evolution. There's a growing understanding that it's changing, and it's probably not as harmful as alcohol. Right? That's what it seems to be. But again, my own, you know what I mean? We have to look at where we are personally with this. Anyway, that's just to add a little bit. Yeah, it goes back into the band's bank account.
It would benefit doing something with it than letting it just sit doing nothing.
Well, that was the part of the original decision-making. So she's asking, well, what would happen with the 3 million plus 5% if we don't invest, right? So it goes back into the band bank account, and it sits there. Part of the original decision-making, whenever we did have business analysts look at it, we did have our director of finance look at it. They said, well, our bank is not ready to give us any significant interest on our money that's in there. We could invest in bonds or this or that, but we're going to get about 1%. So we said, if we have 3 million in our account and we put 3 million with Zenabis, at least we're going to get 5%. Worst case scenario, we're going to make $300,000 over 2 years. Worst case scenario, right? My thinking on this too, and it's just a mathematical thing. Trevin mentioned it, right? And this is just my thinking, right? So we have an opportunity to buy shares at a discounted price. So we would buy them at 80 cents on the dollar. Okay, so from doing that, we would gain 20% more just from purchasing shares. So we'd gain another 20% on our 3.3 million by converting the shares. If we then turned around and sold our shares immediately after, we've probably gained about $1 million from the initial 3 to the time we sell our shares. That's just one consideration I think is important to keep in mind, just from a numbers, purely math, taking the emotion out of it. Anyway,
we
I can
have a
step
question
aside.
over here.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief. This question is for the two individuals from BDO. You say you do not represent Zenabis? Okay. How about if I throw this at you? We take the $3 million we were asked this time to invest. Why wouldn't you invest it in Canopy?
That's a good question. So even though Canopy's bigger, that doesn't mean that their value is going to increase more for what you're doing. You know, Canopy's already have their market share. Zenabis is growing quite quickly, and so if you invest in a company that's growing at a slower rate, then you won't be able to make as much money. I think on top of just the investment, having the company in your community and maybe through the negotiation of the shareholder agreement, being able to get some additional economic benefits for your community is an opportunity that you wouldn't get with Canopy or any other company that isn't here too.
Yeah. To support some of the concerns that were raised regarding Zenabis and the questions we have, I appreciate the Chief's answer, but Chief, I don't believe you answered that question. The questions that we have for Zenabis and the questions that we have for the Chief and Council and the 3 options that are on the table, when are we going to talk about that?
So we do have a meeting scheduled. Tim, are you going to wait for the answer? Okay, ask a question, leave. I still didn't answer it, right? Okay, so what we have scheduled next week, next Tuesday, for our council meeting is a follow-up to this discussion. So after that, we'll have a chance to go through all of the concerns that were raised tonight. I think some of them all of them are valid, and I think some of them we could probably answer pretty quickly and come up with some decisions. Others, I think, as you talked about, holding shares and what does that look like and what kind of structures and the process for getting there and all that. That's something that, if we're not going to invest, then why do that research, right? But if there's an appetite to invest, then we have to start looking at that. So that's where our follow-up meeting next week is going to be very important. And do we have to set up a separate economic development corporation? Do we have to create I think for managing risk or exposure of LMG, I think it would be important to set up a separate entity, a corporation of sorts. I think that's an important aspect in economic development arm to LMG. but there's some other aspects that come into that. It's not something that's going to be taken lightly. It's not something that I can say, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. There's a whole council that has to decide and weigh in on that. So we'll take it, do some due diligence on it, discuss it next week, and then try to come up with more and more information as we go. If that, I hope that gives you some, yeah, as we've been trying to do since the beginning, right? Okay. Always.
I don't need that.
No, we do, so everybody else can hear it, Frank. So everybody can hear you, that's why it's.
All right. I hope that the three options that we have in front of us, are they going to go through a better process of approval than when the $3 million was invested? Because I was told that one of the meetings, it was an information meeting, and a week later, the $3 million was invested in the company.
Making sure I write it down. So just to correct, it was a loan at the time, not an investment. And that's something we'll discuss next week, is what's our next steps here? What's our next process? I know a referendum was suggested. That's going to cost us about $60,000 to run a referendum to make the decision. The timing of it may lead to us exceeding the agreement. That by the time we get an answer and then start moving on an agreement, our initial loan agreement would be done and terminated. So we have to consider a few options in there. I think, to answer your question, I think we've done a better job of decision making since, because we've had, I think we've had Zenabis come here on 3 different occasions. We've held an open house at Zenabis where all of our community members were invited and open. It was open to all to go and visit and tour the facility. Nobody else in the region got that opportunity. They said no to Tidehead, they said no to Atherville, they had people showing up for there, said sorry, it's not for you. This is Listuguj only. So we've had a lot of opportunity to discuss this, to weigh the pros and cons, to ask questions, to engage in dialogue. So I think we have taken a better approach to decision making with regards to this investment. I can't say what the final yes or no. I know at one community meeting, we had a show of hands of everybody in the audience, and everybody in the audience said, make the investment. Everybody that was here. So the community members that participated, the community members that showed up, wanted that investment to go forward. So I don't know, sorry, what the next step would be necessarily, but we can follow up with that at council next week and look at our options.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment regarding Zenabis. Whether we like it or not, it's coming. You know, that plant is going to be open. Now I think the bigger picture is to look at is that how is our community going to benefit from it? Okay, we're looking at the future of our children, not by them smoking Zenabis or anything. I think what we should be looking at are the doctors, not this Zenabis plant. You know, with all the opioids and everything else in our community. We need to take a look at what's best for our community. We're always talking about self-government. How are we going to get there? What are we going to do to reach those goals? And we have to work together as a community. I, for one, have no use for Zenabis, whether it's marijuana or, but that's my personal opinion, okay? But if it's coming anyway. So if we can benefit something from it, our community, you know, Donna was saying earlier, there's already programs available for people that are going to need extra help. And it's always been available to our community. We have an abundance of services here in our community. Madeline had mentioned earlier that we're going to look at the how it's going to impact our young. Well, I worked in this field for 33 years. And 33 years ago it was there, it's still there today. It's not any bigger and it's not any smaller, it's there. If our youth are going to get into Zenabis, they're going to get into it. Some are going to like it, some are not going to like it. Some are going to move on to something bigger, whether it's alcohol, Zenabis, opioids, it's there. So let's look at this objectively and look at what it can do for our community. not just for one individual, but what it's going to do for all of us. You know, if the money is going to sit there and not collect any interest, and this way, we're not losing anything anyway. We're going to be gaining regardless, unless if the market falls, and that's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
I had to
That's
just
just
double
my
check.
opinion.
I had to double check their professional opinion. Thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, comments? Oh, George.
Where exactly does that $3 million come from? Is it SA money or is it own source revenue?
It would have been own source revenue that was available at the time, but it wouldn't have been. I don't know. I have to ask a question in return though. What do you mean by SA money?
The settlement agreement money that was left over for our kids when they turn 18.
Oh,
they
that
can
can't
claim.
be touched. That can't be
Okay.
touched at all. And
Okay.
same for the adults. It can't be. They're both in trust.
Okay.
There's very strict rules on both of those in trust. So we can let that one go. I'm glad I asked for clarification because it's, yeah. So everybody knows those dollars are put away, they're in trust, very strict rules. There's an OIC that we have to pass just to access the dollars for the quarterly PCD payments. Shane can elaborate on that whole process if you want to after the meeting. Or at another time, right, Shane?
We've been here 2.5 hours. It's been a great discussion, great meal. It's always great to see all you guys come out to the meeting. Anytime you have questions, you can call our offices, call the chief, call our office. If not, it's a wrap, I guess. Everybody's leaving. Well, all the del bay dayo, del